Hello everyone, my name is Phawx. In this video we're going to be competing AMD's Van Gogh, which is on the SteamDeck, versus AMD Rembrandt, which is going to be the 6800U on the GPD WinMax 2. Now this is a lot of data that I recorded. There were 400 some odd benches, and it's all going to get collapsed down into about 8 different pictures. Now the thing here is, I actually wanted to have this done a few days ago, but then GPD updated the BIOS on the GPD WinMax 2, and one of the notes that they had on there was basically performance improvements. So that I was just like, oh no, I have to redo everything. So I have tests before the BIOS updates and I have tests after the BIOS updates, and I'm going to reference those in the following images that you're going to see between the benches. Additionally, since I was already there and I figured out how to do it, I've saw how to cap the GPU frequency, set it statically on the 6800U, and that changed performance a good amount, sometimes 10 to 20% better at the same TDP, same power. So it's free performance, 10 to 20% free performance. And I demonstrate in that video. There's going to be a segment in this video that just shows that, and I'm not going to edit it out so that you don't think there's any trickery going on, but so that you can see how the system is responding and how we're actually getting better performance, even though we're using no additional power. So that's pretty much what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be taking a look at the SteamDeck and the AMD 6800U on the GPD WinMax 2. But on the first test, we're going to take a look at trying to figure out performance on the differences between different TDPs. So I do a scope of every TDP level. So that's 5 watt, 6 watt, 7 watt, 8 watt, all the way up to 30 watt. Now on the SteamDeck, that only goes up to 15 watt. So on the SteamDeck, it's kind of a shorter band, but on the 6800U, I go all the way up to 30 watt. Additionally, inside that same scope at 5 watt, 6 watt, 7 watt, I do different core parking. So I tested 2 core, quad core, 6 core, and 8 core. And there are some surprising results. So let's go ahead and take a look at that right now. Up first, we're going to be looking at a Unigen 1 test. We're using Heaven. The settings are Ultra and Extreme, so that's Ultra settings with Extreme tessellation and 800p. And this was done on the SteamDeck as well as the GPD WinMax 2. Up at the top, you can see blue represents 6800U, red represents quad core, yellow represents 6 core, green represents the default 8 core, and then orange is the default 8 core, but this is after the BIOS update so that we can see if there's any difference there. And then this teal color is the SteamDeck. So really quickly here, let me go ahead and just change the chart style here just so you can kind of see what this looks like. So here we can take a look. Here is the SteamDeck, and you can kind of see that the SteamDeck, if I can get this right there, the SteamDeck really kind of has massive diminishing returns starting at around 11 watt. You can see it right there. And then there's just gradual gains. So from 11 watt, we have 45.1 average FPS, and then at 15 watt, 48.1. So less than 10% gains for a pretty significant increase in TDP. So going from 11 watt, we're injecting 4 more watts. It's almost a 40% increase in TDP. Now that's not representative of total system power, but we can see that we're not getting ginormous gains. We kind of cap off where our gains are. However, if we take a look at the beginning portion of the SteamDeck, down from 5 watt and 10 watt, we can see that this whole segment here is just crushing the 6800U, no matter what configuration we run on here. Now, I'm not doing any GPU clock tests because this is just a single test on taking a look at the changes on the CPU side. And what's interesting is that if we can take a look at the green one here, and orange is right underneath it, but technically my before BIOS update was better in this particular test up until higher TDPs. Right here, when you can see the orange line just competing over the older BIOS. So it's kind of interesting data. So this is what the scatter plot looks like here. And again, you can see that the SteamDeck is just crushing it at lower TDPs. So this is pretty much where we can create some hypotheses, some guesses at stuff. And this is why I kind of, if you've been following along on Twitter, why I have been choosing 9 watt and 11 watt and 15 watt and then 18 watt, because you can see 18 watt right here. This is where diminishing return starts on the AMD 6800U. But you can see why I chose 9 watt and 11 watt, because 9 watt here we're clearly beating the 6800U in this particular test. So that should be the same for other tests, and we'll go on to that in a moment. And then at 10 watt things starting to kind of collide, and then 11 watt this is where the 6800U starts getting better. The other interesting point of the data is, and it's really surprising, take a look at, like, so here we have dual core and quad core. Both of these are performing really poorly at lower TDPs, which is surprising because you would think that if I were to physically park cores so that 6 CPUs are basically inactive and there's power distribution to 2 cores and the GPU and on core, shouldn't we have gained performance? But it seems like the whole CPU block took a look at L3 cache clocks. I took a look at memory clocks, Infinity Fabric clocks. They're all jotting down as they should at lower TDPs. For instance, at 5 watt, I'm pretty much locked at 400 megahertz on the memory. So it's interesting to see that when I park CPU cores that I get worse performance overall. Now, the only place that I actually get better performance with parking cores is quad core, but at the high end and in CPU bound situations, when I do things that are taxing more on GPU, for all intents and purposes, parking cores is not advisable at all, especially when we take a look at this data. Now, we can look at another piece of data. Let me get that set up. All right, so this is another benchmark where I ran different core configurations in terms of the CPU core. I am parking cores here. Are using the Valley benchmark. It is ultra settings, so we're going to be a little bit more GPU bound, and 800p because that's what we need for the SteamDeck to try to get a more complete comparison between these two platforms. Now, on SteamDeck, you can clearly see at everything below 9 watt, we are clearly winning here, and 6800U is just getting beat up no matter what. Again, no matter what CPU core parking configuration I put it in. But more importantly, if we take a look, the green segment is clearly leading. Let's go into a different chart style just so you can kind of see it as a line. All right, so here is SteamDeck. And again, you can see as soon as it hits 11 watt, look at those massive diminishing returns that happen. So pretty much 11 watt, and this is data that I talked about a long time ago. SteamDeck is really just good at up to 11 watt. It'll go up to 15 watt, but this is why it's kind of pointless to go past 15 watt on the SteamDeck. It's not helpful. Even after 11 watt, we're getting very little returns. If we just went up, we'd just be wasting power. The other thing here is that we can see that it's just fantastic in this range. Right here, basically at 8 watt, 8 and 9 watt is the sweet spot for the SteamDeck. And this is more or less why, especially if you take a look at this 50 FPS cap here, this is why you can kind of start to get the idea of why I've been pushing 40 hertz, 40 FPS so much on the SteamDeck. Because when we take a look at this segment, it just is fantastic at 40 hertz, 40 FPS. It can do it inside a very small TDP scope, very good total system power. This is basically where it shines. And that's where it really competes really well. But as soon as we get to 10 watt, you can see that the 6800U starts really pulling ahead. At 15 watt, we're significantly ahead. We're basically about 20% better in this particular regard. Then when we get to 18 watt, you can see right here at 18 watt, things really start to kind of level off. Now, the one curious thing is that you can see dual core is just absolutely horrendous. And then quad core, 6 core, and 8 core are kind of competing. But if you just pay attention to this line, the default 8 core configuration is best pretty much throughout. All right, now that we've taken a look at that data, we can start to make some guesses about what we need to do. First off, I don't need to look at any other core configuration. I will not park any cores for any game benchmarks because they didn't show me any benefits here. In fact, it showed me a lot of negatives. So I'm only going to keep it at 8 core. The only difference here is going forward, I'm going to be showing you benches on the old BIOS because I took those a while ago and I had to redo everything for the new BIOS. So you're going to see before and after on the BIOS for the GPD WinMax 2 on the 6800U platform, as well as what that looks like on the SteamDeck, as well as my Phawx tweaks. Now, the Phawx tweaks are basically just statically setting the GPU clock. And that is something that I talk about later on in this particular video. And I don't edit all that much, so it's going to be pretty long. You can skip around, but I didn't want to edit around there just so that you can't think that I'm doing something, tricky. I show you specifically what I do and how the system responds and how we get better performance without spending any more power. We literally are getting 10 to 20% better performance, specifically more on lower TDPs, but spending no additional power. So that's going to be later on in this video. But let's go ahead and jump into some of the benchmarks that I did. But taking a look at 9 watt, because we can see everything 9 watt and below on the Steam Deck is doing very good. 11 watt is when Steam Deck starts losing against 6800U. 15 watt is where 6800U basically starts getting its legs. And then 18.2 watt, which is my personal sweet spot, looking at all the data, especially when we start taking a look at the percentages of how that actually works out. 18.25 watt is a nice sweet spot for 6800U. Going up to 28 watt for the increase in power used isn't really worth it in my opinion in terms of performance gain versus more power used, especially on a portable platform where we have to worry about the battery. And we'll go over those percentages at the end of this, but let's go into taking a look at the benchmarks themselves. So up first is the Batman Arkham Knight 800p high settings. Now the legend at the top, blue is going to be Steam Deck, red is going to be WinMax 2 average. This is before BIOS updates. The yellow orange is the new BIOS, and then the green is my particular tweaks. So very quickly, you can see 9 watt right here. 9 watt is winning on the Steam Deck, like we saw from the earlier data. If we just take a look at the new BIOS that GPD submitted, around a 30% increase, Steam Deck is 30% better. But more to the point here, let's kind of back up a second here. 49 FPS average at 9 watt isn't helpful, especially when we take a look at Steam Deck at 15 watt, at 55 FPS. That's not 60 FPS. This data that I'm showing you is why I myself have been pushing so hard for 40 hertz, 40 FPS. The Steam Deck is a 40 hertz, 40 FPS machine. It excels in that area. It doesn't really do good at 60 FPS unless games are very old. When we start talking about more newer, modern type of PC games, the Steam Deck really just doesn't hit 60 FPS often enough for that to be valuable. And if it does, we're going to be wasting so much power that you're going to get 90 minutes of battery life. If we instead just focus on how great the Steam Deck is at 8 watt and 9 watt TDP, it really starts to become clear how much better this machine is as a 40 hertz, 40 FPS machine. So let's go back into the data. If we take a look at 11 watt TDP, we can see that the 6800U really starts pulling ahead, but with my particular tweaks, we actually get a significant advantage, almost 10 to 20% better than the 11 watt scores from the Steam Deck. And then at 15 watt, this is where we generally just do better. Again, it's 10 to 20%. So here's the thing that I really want to kind of highlight. Let's take a look at 15 watt and 18 watt, specifically just the 6800U. If we take a look at just these numbers, you can see that we only have, what, a 5% performance increase, and we're using basically 10% more total system power to do it. This is an okay arrangement in terms of paying more and what we get back. It's not really fantastic, a 5% performance improvement for 10% more power. It's okay. This is kind of really why I say 18 watt is where 6800U is good. And then if we take a look at 18 watt to 28 watt, now this is the part I really want to kind of hammer home here. We are getting, in this particular segment, a 5 to 10% increase in performance between 18 watt and 28 watt. That is a 5 to 10% increase in performance for 50% more power. That is so not worth it. This is something that you should only use when you are docked, when you have the machine docked and hooked up to a computer or something else, or if you're going to be using it as with an eGPU as well, you'll get gains there. But you should not be running 28 watt in a portable state. The performance gain versus how much power you're using, that exchange isn't worth it at all. 5 to 10% for 50% more power, that's a losing proposition. The point here I'm trying to make is you would not spend $50 on something that you thought the value was $5, right? You would feel ripped off. You should feel ripped off if you're using 28 watt TDP on 6800U. It's really not worth it unless you're plugged in. This is true at all times. So we'll go on to the next benchmark. Here we're taking a look at Borderlands 3, and once again, the Steam Deck is winning at 9 watt, but it's not winning that much over the previous platforms. Now, on the old BIOS, we did have a pretty good lead. Now, on the old BIOS, we did have like a 20% lead, but on the newer GPD BIOS, the newer GPD BIOS actually matches close to what my Phawx tweaks are. In this particular game with DirectX 12 and Vulkan, it becomes a little bit difficult to try to maximize GPU because DirectX 12 and Vulkan are very good APIs in that scope. With my GPU tweaks, we're really kind of trying to balance what's going on with the CPU. You can really start to see that my tweaks, specifically with trying to adjust for GPU, isn't worth it at all, and just leaving it to default. So DirectX 12 and Vulkan, I really would recommend not really doing anything with my tweaks, but this is the data right here. And again, we can see that 11 watt, we do pull ahead from the SteamDeck. And even if we take a look at the 9, 11, and 15 watt, you can see the diminishing returns that the SteamDeck gets for pushing more power into the platform. Again, it is an 8 and 9 watt TDP platform. Going above that really isn't very helpful. Once again, you can see that at 15 watt, the 6800U basically starts getting its legs, but at 18 watt, we get a decent performance boost for how much extra power we're putting into the platform. From 15 watt to 18 watt, we're getting about a 10% performance increase for a 20% performance improvement. Now that's an okay exchange in terms of what we're paying and what we're getting. Again, 18 watt is where I find it to be satisfactory. And then we take a look at 28 watt, and you'd have to ask yourself why you would even be doing that when you were on battery. 28 watt, I would only use while you were plugged in. You're going to have a bad time. Even on the GPD WinMax 2, you're looking at 90 minutes of battery life, and the GPD WinMax 2 has almost a 70 watt hour battery. That is absurd. Like, if you want to do it, sure, go ahead, go nuts. I wouldn't recommend it. All right, the next benchmark we're going to take a look at here is Cyberpunk. Now, this is 800p. We're using the SteamDeck preset with medium textures and FSR set to auto. Here at the 9 watt score, you can clearly, I mean, it's just a fantastic boost for the SteamDeck in this regard. At this particular, at 9 watt, 8 watt, you're looking at capping at 30 FPS and just having a very good time right there. On 6800U, even before and after the BIOS updates, I didn't really get all that great a performance. I actually show this particular benchmark later on in this video, showing the benchmark just running at 9 watt and then 9 watt with my tweaks. And I show you the scores in real time, like in actual evidence. So you'll see that actually happen. So you can see we get 2419 with my tweaks, but we're still way behind on the SteamDeck here. Even at 11 watt, so this is one interesting bit of data. 11 watt here is really pulling ahead on SteamOS. So there is most likely some other optimization, something else going on here that is really benefiting the SteamDeck. So the SteamDeck preset really is excellent on the SteamDeck, but 6800U still doesn't kind of compete. And then at 15 watt, we start pulling ahead, but really nothing meaningful. In this particular benchmark, the SteamDeck is really holding its ground really well against the 6800U. This is still early days in testing. Now, I'm just using the SteamDeck preset. Obviously, you can use other different settings to get better performance. I do hope to do another video where I replace DLSS with FSR2 and see what I can get there, and also see if we can get any ray tracing out of that. Probably not, but it'll be interesting to see. Next up is Deus Ex, Mankind Divided 800p DirectX 12 with Ultra settings. Now, this is one area where I actually managed to get ahead of the SteamDeck at 9 watt. So pretty interesting data, especially because we're just taxing that GPU really hard, all the way hardcore. The other thing here is that without my tweaks, SteamDeck is winning, but with my tweaks, we are winning. So there is some semblance of data here that there are going to be areas where the 6800U can outperform the SteamDeck at lower TDPs. Right now, I've only had the platform for like a week and a half. I've managed to do some cool stuff with it, but I'm still working on it. I keep on pushing my time spy score a little bit higher every time. In 6 days, I boosted it up a little bit more. So I'm getting a hold of it a little bit more. I hope when more people get this platform that we can really start all diving in together as a community and really start extracting best performance at low TDPs. And then 11 watt, we really start pulling ahead. I mean, I'm basically saying the same thing over and over again, but more or less you see the same type of data happening again and again. The only difference here being that we actually beat SteamDeck at 9 watt here. Going from 18 watt to 28 watt does show a performance improvement, but it's a giant waste of power on battery. Don't only do that when you're docked. 18 watt really is just a fantastic sweet spot. We would be able to hit 30 FPS. Generally pretty stable here. All right, for the next benchmark, we're going to be taking a look at Horizon Zero Dawn 800p, favoring performance. So now this is kind of switching gears up from what the Deus Ex one was, where we were just pushing for maximum GPU. I mean, mostly what you're going to start looking at here is that it's really just going to come down to a difference of settings, that the 6800U will start pulling ahead at lower TDPs on the SteamDeck. When we push it into a very specific corner, SteamDeck wins at 8 to 9 watt, but there are methods where we could make it worse for Steam Deck, like in the Deus Ex one, where it just couldn't compete with 6800U, especially with my tweaks. Again, just things to be mindful of as we look at this data together. And then 11 watt, we can see with my tweaks, we start pulling ahead about 10% ahead at the same TDP. And at 15 watt, we're about 20% better than the Steam Deck. And at 18 watt, we're about 30% better than the Steam Deck. So again, if we take a look at 28 watt, there's really very little performance gain. So 18 watt really is where 6800U just really has its legs. Okay, next up, Red Dead Redemption 2. This is 800p, 9 watt. This is one part that I was just having difficulty with setting. Now, this is the balance preset. If I were to max out the settings, I would wager that 6800U would pull ahead in this particular segment. Now, this is the balance preset. What's interesting about the Red Dead Redemption 2 is that it's the first tick of balance preset. So it's like you can kind of take it along. It's like, you know, ultra low. And then as soon as you hit balanced, that first setting is what I'm using here. So this particular data set is what I find interesting. It's kind of repeating, and we kind of start framing the idea of where the 6800U really finds itself favoring. What you should do, especially if you're going to be targeting less resolution, is pushing graphical settings, pushing those things higher. Instead of doing balance presets, do ultra presets. And that is one area where you will start to see a benefit of having the 6800U versus the Steam Deck, is that if you wanted to increase quality, you will have a better time without really losing much performance. And this is a place that we'll start to see where things get better on the 6800U platform. It's like 20% better from 15 to 18 watt. So 6800U is only about 20% better than Steam Deck here. Next up, we're going to be taking a look at Shadow of the Tomb Raider. And again, 9 watt Steam Deck is winning. At 11 watt is where we are able to pull ahead, only specifically with my tweaks. At 15 watt is where we start to again see the difference in 6800U. And at 18 watt, we get to that nice sweet spot again on the 6800U. Okay, one of the last tests that we have going here. Again, we're going to be taking a look at, this is Strange Brigade 800p ultra settings using the Vulkan backend. Here we can see that, again, Steam Deck is winning at 9 watt. At 11 watt, we can start pulling ahead with my tweaks. At 15 watt, we have a clear lead no matter what you're going to do. At 18 watt, we have the ultimate performance of 6800U, and 28 watt is where you're going to start maxing it out. And then this test was weird. I was actually hoping it would be better. This is WWE 2K16, 800p high settings. No VSync is bugged. I say no VSync and it still caps itself at 60 FPS. I don't know why. It's just what it's doing. The only thing that's worthwhile pointing here is that Steam Deck can do 60 FPS. With my tweaks, we can also hit 60 FPS. If there was this VSync bug, we would have been able to get better data here. But the last thing I want to leave off here is I'm going to kind of transition off to show you what my Phawx tweaks are and what they look like in real time and how we can just boost performance for free. Want to do that, like, it's free real estate. There are parts of here that once you start to conceptualize CPU block, GPU block, on-core, what's going on there, the power dynamics that are there, how we feed the chip, how we can retune where power is being distributed, we can start to maximize performance while saving the same amount of power. These are the types of things that I've always kind of pioneered and tried pushing for on my channel, is things that I love to see and do so that you can get more for less. That's what we're trying to get here. So let's go ahead and take a look at me doing my Phawx tweaks. So you can take a look at that. It's going to be a little bit of a long segment. I don't want to like fast forward or try to, do any smoke and mirrors type of thing. At the end of that will be the conclusion of it. All right, so just so you guys can kind of follow along, I'm not going to edit ahead of this. The only thing I'm going to edit out is when I change the GPU clock, and that's just because of how sloppy it is. So we're going to set this to Steam Deck. And we're going to go down here. And just so you can see, FSR is set to auto here. And then on the next slide over, we are 800p full screen. So very much deck settings. I'm going to go ahead and hit X to go onto the benchmark. and we'll kind of talk about some things right now. I have enabled silent fan mode before where it was off on God of War, so I am saving an additional watt on total system power. You're going to see that pretty much average around 19 watt right there. If we take a look here, GPU clock, this is at 800 megahertz. Now this may seem counterintuitive why it's so low, but because LPDDR5 runs differently, it's technically quad channel to hit 6400 megatransfers a second. So if you were to do 400 megahertz, which is the lowest P state for the memory, that's actually 3200 megatransfers a second. And at half that, the power drastically goes down. However, performance also drastically goes down. Trying to force the memory clock lower is difficult. I've been able to get 533 megahertz, I believe, but even then it kind of oscillates. But it will stick. It won't go to 800 megahertz, but I didn't see any power benefit from doing so. And when I tried forcing 400 megahertz, it just didn't work at all. GPU clock, you can see we're pretty much locked. Well, not locked, but we were kind of really stuck to 53 megahertz, 533 megahertz. We're down to 200 now, but it's oscillating. It's not statically set right now. And we can see package power. We are capped at 9 watts. So the system is respecting my 9 watt cap, which is perfect. At 9 watt, I'm using around 19 watts of total system power. So this is the screen, the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, the fan, SSD, everything else that's running on this machine and what's being pulled from the battery. So that's a really important metric, and technically the one that we mostly care about, because this is what's going to affect our battery life. All right, so the benchmark there finished, and if we can quickly see, okay, it's kind of hidden under there, but if you take a look, average FPS 21.54, okay? So now I am going to limit the clock rate. Well, it's not limit. I'm going to statically set the clock rate to 900 megahertz. And 900 megahertz GPU clock is typically what I found to be a nice sweet spot for a TDP of 9 watt. As we bump up to different wattages, we kind of have to finagle a little bit with different GPU clocks. Different games want like different stuff, but 9 watt at 900 megahertz seems to be a general sweet spot idea in the event that you guys wanted to statically clock your GPU as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and statically set the GPU. All right, so there you go, 900 megahertz. And if we go back to settings, it will go, this is 800p, but you can still see SteamDeck here, medium texture. We didn't change the preset. I'm gonna go down to the FSR. There we go. Okay, and you can see FSR is at auto. Go back up. Still SteamDeck preset. Oh, I went to key bindings. Okay, still SteamDeck preset. Still 800p. The only difference here is that I statically set the GPU clock to 900 megahertz. We're going to go ahead and run this benchmark again. And again, let's take a look at the CPU package power. Let's take a look at total system power. Both of these are going to be exactly the same. Nothing is changing power-wise. The only thing is that I have changed the dynamics of what's happening on the package to redistribute power differently. And by doing that, I am forcing the system to use more power on the GPU clock. And that means that Uncore and CPU need to give. Something needs to give on the system because I put a 9 watt cap on it and I forced a 900 megahertz GPU clock. And when I do both of those things, the system has to respond. And in this particular event, because of how I'm kind of engineering things, it should be a better net result for us. Take a look at memory clock. Before it was locked at 800 megahertz, and now our memory clock is down to 600 megahertz, which is fine for us, right? Because we are satisfying the GPU bandwidth. We don't need to be delivering 800 megahertz at all times there, but we can see that because of my wrench that I threw in the engine, this is how the system has to respond, and it's doing so by changing memory clocks. Alrighty, and there you can see average FPS aligns with my Phawx Tweaks, so that's 24.95. Same package power, same total system power, just a 20% increase in performance for free. So there it is, guys. Hopefully that shows you what is going on and how it's working. Hopefully Rise and Adjust will be able to have these settings so that you can tweak GPU clocks on your 6800U platform as well. That's pretty much the end of this segment. I mean, the only thing that we could see here is that the system had to respond with better memory clocks, which lowered the power to everything else, but we could give more power to the GPU, thus resulting in a 20% performance boost while using technically no additional power, just better performance. So what did we learn? We learned that the Steam Deck is still a very good platform. AMD's Van Gogh is still very performant inside of 8 watt and 9 watt. The Steam Deck is a 40 hertz 40 FPS machine. I've been saying a million times. I said it a long time ago when I said how big of a deal it was, and it is a big deal because of the arrangement of where the Steam Deck finds itself. So that is kind of what we're kind of collapsing this data down to when we compare these platforms. The difference really starts to come into it is that the 6800U platform is going to have a better time being a 60 FPS machine inside power that isn't that much higher, and especially when we take a look at the GPD WinMax 2, which has a battery that is 50% larger than the Steam Deck, then you start to have better battery life and better performance with ultra settings. And that may not seem like that big of a deal, and it really isn't that big of a deal, but it is still something that's better. Now, when we take a look at $400 to get a Steam Deck, that's still the value king. I don't see anything beating the $400 Steam Deck anytime this year, and possibly not even next year, but maybe late next year with the way things have been going. We might see something, but if you have a Steam Deck, I wouldn't say you should have any buyer's remorse at all. It's still a fantastic platform. If you bought the $400 one, there is nothing this year that will beat that in value, especially when you consider customer support from Valve, how they continually improve upon the platform. It's really just a fantastic price for that. The 6800U is a very exciting chip. It's going to be the thing that I use. I would probably find myself using the GPD WinMax 2 6800U going forward. The 6800U is a handheld. There is no doubt about it. I played standing up like I am right now for 90 minutes straight, holding it, and I had no problem. Now, I'm not saying that you can lay down with it, but I don't find laying down and playing on a handheld comfortable at all. I typically like sitting and having this on my lap, but I can stand and hold this for 90 minutes. My arms weren't tired. Now, that's me. Maybe it'll be for you, but I think really it's just a perception problem that people have that think that this is too big when the Steam Deck is wider than the GPD WinMax 2. So the Steam Deck, again, the Steam Deck isn't too big. The Steam Deck is not too big of a handheld. Now, I know there are some people that just say, no, it's too big and I won't get it. Fine. That I'm not trying to, if that is your opinion, I think it's your perception. But if you really want to just contend that a handheld must be smaller, then okay. There will be other smaller handhelds that are coming out that's great. But the GPD Max 2's benefit is that it is usable as a full laptop, is usable as a handheld, and has a gigantic battery in it. So it has all the things that I'm looking at. Also, that giant screen is just fantastic. So the GPD WinMax 2 still is super awesome in its scope. It becomes a lot more favorable to look at if you look at the high-end Steam Deck, which is the 512 gigabyte version, where you're almost at like $700, and then you can get a GPD WinMax 2 for $1,000, and you're like, okay, it's 30%, 35% more money, and I'm going to generally get 20 to 30% better performance. Okay, you're going to be spending a little bit more money and you're going to get that back in performance. And you'll get that. You'll get that in better frame rate, better settings, so you can go to more ultra settings, and still be able to use it as a laptop as well. So there's a lot of things going for it, but I wouldn't say that it just absolutely decimates the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck holds its own, especially at lower TDPs, which we care about, in a portable sense, right? Because it's still running on a battery. The only thing I want to make note of is that I have been talking with GPD in the background, and they still have more BIOS tweaks coming. They are saying that there should be more performance enhancements coming forward. I'm hopeful that we won't actually have to do my Phawx tweaks at all with the new stuff that GPD is doing, so that's really cool. I will look at that later as well. This is where we are right now. It's just a fantastic time. There's a lot of other platforms coming out with 6800U. It's a great time to be a PC handheld enthusiast. that is it for me, guys. Hopefully that answers a lot of questions. If you want, I'm going to leave a link to the GPD Discord below. You can come by and, ask me questions if you want. If you want to take a look at the data together or whatever, feel free to ping me. That is it for me. As always, guys, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.